Okay, thank you so much, Mrs. Ennis, for that very warm introduction. Hi, everybody. Welcome to my note. It's nice to, I know some familiar faces, some new faces. It's nice to see and meet all of you. And I'm looking forward to learning with you for today and whoever comes the other weeks also. Okay, so before we delve into this particular question that you see at the top of your page, I just want to give a short introduction about what we're going to do here for the next 5 weeks. So this year happens to be Rav Moshe Feinstein's 30th yahrzeit. He died in March of 1986. And although I think we don't often think of Rav Moshe Feinstein as a leader of the modern Orthodox community, many of his decisions, of his responsa, really have substantial impact on our lives. So in honor of his 30th yahrzeit, I thought it would be interesting each week to learn a responsa of his, including like the background sources and the whole development of how he gets to his bottom line on an interesting and relevant topic. And as part of our learning, I want to try to glean a little bit about his methodology so we can appreciate his, his greatness as a posik, as a halachic decisor, by appreciating his methodology. So has anyone here ever asked a shaila of a rabbi?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so what do you usually think of as going into the person who answers decision? Like, what do you think?
Of finding a makeup.
So when you're asking, you're usually looking to find a
What I
makeup.
want
But
to
what's
try to
going to lead
get
that
at.
person to be makeup or machmer? Like, what are they considering?
Who you are.
Okay, they're considering you, like who the asker is.
Their own personalities.
Okay,
and,
good.
You know.
Their own, obviously, like proclivities,
Right.
or their own backgrounds. So, but different halachic questions actually are different, and depending on the type of question that it is, some of these factors might play in or might not, right? So most halachic questions, what the answer is going to be is not really, it's okay, is not high. Welcome everybody. There are sheets at the other end, and we're talking about the methodology of Rav Moshe Feinstein. So what the answer to a given question is more often than not so clear cut. But there are some questions that are pretty straightforward, pretty simple, that one person might have the knowledge to know the answer, another person might not. For example, I dropped my plastic spoon into my milchik pot, whatever. It's not such a complicated question. If a person never learned those halachot, they might not know the answer. But if someone did learn those halachot, they know the answer, or they could know where to look it up. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, done. So that doesn't really take into account like your personalities and social factors and other things. It's more straightforward. But a lot of other questions are not so clear cut. They require judgment calls. They require things to be other factors to be considered. And different poskim, different decisors, different leaders employ different methodologies when it comes to arriving at a conclusion on those types of questions that are not so clear cut. Other examples of, right, so sometimes there are questions that might have come up in earlier generations, but the bottom line answers are not so clear cut, and different leaders have come to different conclusions, and now it's the leaders of our generation, it's their turn to try to figure out how to, all the factors go into play and how to reach a conclusion. And another example of a not so clear cut type of question is when there's innovation, right? And there's innovation, technology, new things that never came up before. For example, electricity on Shabbos, and how that, and that has so many ramifications, whether electricity on Shabbos is a rabbinic level prohibition or a biblical level prohibition, and that has a lot of practical significance in terms of doctors and in terms of when we're allowed to do what. Or, e-commerce, let's say, e-commerce on Shabbos, or lots of other questions having to do with the internet and modern technology. So it also, different halachic authorities need to consider different factors and make judgment calls about how these things should apply and how to reach a conclusion. So one methodology of arriving at psak, which is really championed, I think, in our generation by Rav Ovadia Yosef, who also passed away a few years ago, but was a leading halachic authority in Yerushalayim, is to really look at all the decisions of the past relevant to this question, every single source, right, starting from the Psukim and the Gemara and the Rishonim, right, the medieval commentaries and modern commentaries, and every single source ever written about this, or written about any topic that might have to do with this, and to really weigh all of those decisions, and to pick a majority, right, to go with the majority. Whatever the majority view is on this particular question, that's what we're going to go with. That's also the approach of the Mishnah Brura, right, the Rabbi Yisrael Meir Cohen Kegan, the Chafetz Chaim, who also wrote the Mishnah Brura. That's really his approach also. And if you read Rav Ovadia Yosef's responsa or any of his books, you see he quotes like every single source under the sun, and you really appreciate his breadth of knowledge, that he was a huge giant of a Talmid Chacham. He knew everything, and that's his methodology, to really look at everything and then kind of weigh what seems to be the majority, and that's how he arrives at his decision. Another method, though, is really, I think, the method championed by Rav Moshe Feinstein, is, right, he is really the paradigm of a decisor, of a pusik, who relies on his own understanding, his own original understanding, right? Often he provides really no support in later sources for his understanding of a particular sugya, right, of a particular discussion in the Gemara. And he tries to show why he understands the Gemara a certain way. Nothing else in the Gemara contradicts his understanding and his position, and then he trusts his intuitive understanding of the sources. And that's not to say that he's not knowledgeable of later sources and he doesn't care about them, and obviously he does consider the development of halacha and what the medieval commentaries say and what other modern authorities might say, but his main focus is really going back to the original discussion in the Gemara, to the original sources, and thinking about how he understands it and how he would apply that to the contemporary question and arrive at a conclusion that way, which is very different, I think, from Rav Ovadia Yosef's and that school of thought method of, weighing the majority. And Rav Moshe Feinstein actually gives us a bit of insight as to his attitude about this, in his own introduction to his responsa. Rav Moshe Feinstein's responsa are called the Igrot Moshe, right? And Igeret is like a scroll, a letter. So the Igrot Moshe, the letters from Moshe, are his responsa, which are published in, I think, 7 volumes, I believe. And he, in his introduction, this is what he says. So if you look at source number 1 on your sheets, and I'll read it in English, right? He says, and with regard to what my friend wrote, how are we permitted to rely on new understandings that may go against what other commentaries wrote? I say, God forbid we should say there has been a boundary put up that the ability to interpret the Torah is over, and we should only rule what is already found in books. So Moshe Feinstein is saying, how could someone possibly say that, what a previous generation said, like that's set in stone, that's sealed, and it's done, and we can only now, in our contemporary times, rule based on what we find previously written. Right? And when new questions come up that aren't discussed, we shouldn't decide them, even though we are able to. Right? If someone is of the caliber that he's able to make a judgment call in a new question, then he should decide it. We can't possibly say that when a new question comes up, we're not allowed to make a decision about it because it wasn't written about previously. And he says, certainly, in my humble opinion, it's prohibited to say this. Right? You can't say this, he thinks, since of course Torah should continue to grow in our times, and anyone who's capable of rendering decisions on a question is obligated to do so to the best of his ability. So anyone who is of the caliber, of the learning level, of the knowledge to render a decision, a halakhic decision, is actually obligated to do so. You can't just say, oh, this question wasn't addressed previously, so we're not going to address it, we're not going to deal with it. We have an obligation to make sure that Torah continues to grow and apply to new questions in every generation. And the person is obligated to do so to the best of his ability by exploring Talmud and commentaries with clear understanding, even if it's a law that wasn't discussed previously in books. So he says that how do you answer
Julia Rose, and Solomona Richter, please come up here.
How do you answer questions? By exploring the Talmud and the commentaries. You look with your own original view. You look with your own eyes to see what your original understanding is. Right? And he says that that's definitely true about a question that wasn't discussed previously, and even regarding a law that was discussed previously, the decisor has to understand the issue and reach a conclusion based on his understanding, and not just rule based on what he finds written. And that's really the line where he highlights that this is his approach, to really take his own understanding and apply it. Okay, so that's kind of the introduction of what I want to do here, and what we're going to spend most of our time doing is really learning the specific issue at hand each week, but hopefully we'll have this background in mind. We'll be able to see Rav Moshe Feinstein doing this, and we'll also highlight other parts of his methodology related to some of the things that some of you raised about when you ask questions and some of the other topics that we'll cover. So with that background in mind, I want to delve into this topic, right? The topic that I want to talk about today is, can you invite your colleague or anyone else?
Great news. The Pride and Prejudice are here, and there's a price reduction so that now they're $5.
Who you know is Jewish but is not observant to a Shabbos meal. What's potentially the problem with that?
Get them while they're hot. Thank you.
Okay, right, let's say you live in Teaneck, this person lives in Manhattan. How are they going to get there? They're going to take a bus, they're going to take a taxi, they're going to take an Uber, they're going to take a zip car, they're going to drive, whatever it is. And they might violate Shabbos in order to get to you. So are you allowed to put them in that situation? Or, right, something else that happened actually to me this past Shabbos. The Eruv was down in half of my community. My community where I live is made up of, we're actually a part of 2 different Eruvin, and one of the Eruvin was down. So where my house is, the Eruv was down, and we had invited company and the question was, like, could we still kind of leave that invitation extended to the company, knowing that they might come anyway, even if they had like a little baby who they were going to have to push in the stroller, they were going to have to carry. So this is a question that we were facing this past Shabbos. Luckily for us, I couldn't remember how old their baby really was, and I thought their baby might walk, and they lived pretty close by, so we kind of just left it alone. But it was a question that I was thinking about. Okay, so let's delve into the sources, and we'll try to explore this question. At the end, we'll get back to Moshe Feinstein's response about this, and we'll see how he deals with the question. So the first, so again, we pose a potential problem that the person you're going to put the person in a situation where they're going to violate Shabbos. So what's the problem with that? Why is that not something that's not okay to do? So it maybe is based on the pasuk in Vayikra, in source number 2. The pasuk says, "Lo tekalel cherish v'lifnei iver lo titein michshol ve'yareta me'elokecha ani Hashem." That you shouldn't curse a deaf person, and in front of a blind person, you shouldn't place a stumbling block. Fear God, I am God. Okay, so many of us might have heard of this prohibition before, not to place a stumbling block in front of a blind person. But what does it actually include? What are we not supposed to do? What is the stumbling block or obstacle? So, any thoughts?
Anything that's going to cause them to do Avera.
Okay, so it's not like literally like I shouldn't trip you like with this water bottle. It's that I shouldn't put you in a situation where you're going to violate an Avera. Anyone agree, disagree? Agree. Okay, so let's see. So Rashi is quoting the Midrash Halacha to help us understand what this pasuk is really talking about. And Rashi says, "V'lifnei iver lo titein," source number 3. V'lifnei iver, still on page 1. "Lifnei iver lo titein michshol. Lifnei hasuma b'davar lo titein eitza she'ena hogenet lo." In front of someone who's blind to a certain matter, someone who doesn't know anything about a certain topic, don't give him bad advice. Right? If you are a doctor and someone else is not a doctor, don't tell them, right? Don't give them medical advice that's really not sound advice. Like, don't tell them the wrong thing that's not in their best interest. That's what Rashi says in the name of the Midrash Halacha, right? Al tumar mechor sadcha v'kach lecha chamor. Don't tell someone, right? Someone who's not a real estate guru. Don't tell them, oh yeah, you should sell your house for a donkey, right? It's worth it. It's a good trade, right? You're getting value there. Okay, don't, and then you're going to end up actually like getting the house instead because the person is not going to want to sell it to that person. They're going to sell it to you, right? So don't give someone bad advice that you know is really bad advice and they don't know because they're not knowledgeable about that topic. Okay, and that's how the Rambam also explains this mitzvah in the Sefer HaMitzvot in source number 4, still on page 1. Right, the Rambam says the 299th mitzvah. Maimonides in his counting of the mitzvot. He says the 299th mitzvah warns against any of us leading anyone else to stumble through offering advice. Meaning if someone asks you for advice involving some matter, he can be persuaded in this regard. If someone's asking you for advice, they care what you say. They're looking to you for advice. So the prohibition is issued against tricking him and leading him to stumble. You should rather lead him straight to the matter as you feel is good and correct. And this is what is meant when Hashem says, you shall not place a stumbling block before the blinds. That's what lifnei iver lo titein michshol means. Someone who's blind to a certain topic, they don't have knowledge of a certain topic, don't give them advice that's going to make them stumble, that's going to mess them up. And then, at the end though, the Rambam adds one more point as to what is also included in this topic, which goes to what you were saying before. So in addition to what we saw from Rashi, from the Midrash, in which the Rambam also agrees with, he adds a specific type of bad advice that you could give, which is at the end, he says, right, Chazal say that this prohibition includes also one who offers assistance in the committing of a sin or who brings it about. So not only bad real estate advice, bad medical advice, any of these types of things, which don't necessarily have to do with sins, but specifically it's also prohibited to put someone in a situation where they're going to sin, which might not necessarily be by offering advice. Right? It's not necessarily going to be a situation where someone asks you, should I do this? And you say yes, even though the answer really should be no. But it might be setting up a situation where the person's going to sin. That's also a violation of lifnei iver. So that's the area of lifnei iver that we're going to focus on today. The prohibition to assist someone else or set someone else up to violate an avera. And the main discussion of this topic is in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, a passage in the Gemara in Masachet Avodah Zarah. So if you look at source number 5. On page 2. So some background for this Gemara is that the Mishnah at the beginning of Masachet Avodah Zarah says that we're forbidden to have commerce, Jewish people are forbidden to have commerce with Gentiles who are idolatrous, right, who commit idolatry, who worship idols, 3 days before their festival, Lifnei Eidehen, when they have like holidays, pagan, idolatrous holidays, we're not allowed to have commerce with them 3 days before. So the question is, why not? And the Gemara adds that you also can't give your animal, you can't give an animal to this Gentile person during that 3-day period. So if I have a Gentile neighbor and I have a chicken that I was going to give to this Gentile, in those 3 days before the holiday, I'm not allowed to give them that chicken. Even though that's not really commerce, if they're not going to pay me for it, it's a gift, that's also not allowed. The question is why? So that's where our Gemara comes in. And the Gemara is raising 2 possible reasons for the second prohibition. So again, the prohibition is that you can't, 3 days before a pagan idolatrous holiday, you can't give a gift of an animal, or possibly anything else, to this non-Jew who celebrates this holiday. So the Gemara wants to know why. So the Gemara says, Ibailahu, right, an informational question, is it mishum harvacha, or dilma v'lefnei iver lo titei mechshol? So those are the 2 options. Is it because the Gentile is going to offer thanksgiving to his God as a result of his newfound profit, his newfound gift? He now has this new thing that he didn't have before, and he's so grateful, so appreciative, and he's going to say, like, God, right, God the sun, God this tree, God whatever it is that he worships, he's going to thank that God for this item, and then you're going to have it's going to appear that you sort of like participated in the festival, right? You're going to kind of like been the one to it's going to appear that you're participating in this worship. Or is it a matter of lifnei iver lo titein mechshol? No, it's not that like we're worried that it's going to look like you're the one who's doing it, but he's going to use this animal for a sacrifice, or he's going to give this animal as a sacrifice, and then you effectively facilitated his idol worship because he got the animal from you, and then he sacrificed it to an idol, to a pagan god. So you facilitated this idol worship, and that therefore is possibly a violation of lifnei iver lo titein mechshol. You set him up to violate the Savegra.
But he's a non-Jew.
Okay, so that's a very good question, right? He's not Jewish, so potentially, who cares? So maybe though, you could say for any of the Shechem Mitzvot B'nai Noach, right, non-Jews are also obligated in them, and therefore we can't facilitate them violating it. That really would depend on, there's a question about lifnei iver lo titei mechshol, about how to sort of categorize it, how to define it. Is it its own prohibition? Like, it's prohibited to eat non-kosher, and it's prohibited to, eat without saying a bracha, and it's prohibited to steal, and there's also a separate prohibition, another prohibition of lifnei iver lo titein mechshol, don't set someone else up to do an avera. Or another way of understanding it, which is maybe more novel but could also help answer this question, is no, for each sin that you do, lifnei iver is kind of like an extension of that sin, right? It's not its own thing, but stealing is one problem, and setting someone else up to steal is kind of like stealing B, right? It's like it's an extension of stealing. So it's not its own thing, but it's part of the avera of stealing. You're not allowed to steal, and you also can't set someone else up to make them steal. And there's other types of concepts in halacha that also are subject to this distinction, like hidur mitzvah, when you're like beautifying a mitzvah. Like, is that its own mitzvah to like make other mitzvah more beautiful, or is it like part of each mitzvah, like to decorate your sukkah? Is that like doing the mitzvah of sukkah like in a more beautiful way, or maybe like you fulfill your mitzvah of sukkah and then you also fulfill this other mitzvah of hidur mitzvah by like making it more beautiful? So that's a question that comes up in different contexts in halacha of how to sort of like define these almost like extra mitzvot, and that might bear that might affect this question of the Gentile, because if it's its own separate mitzvah, so then it's not one of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, so then they shouldn't be a problem for a Gentile to violate this. But if it's an extension of each mitzvah itself, then for the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, then presumably it would be a problem for a Gentile also. Does that make sense? Okay. But that's a good question to point out, that it is noteworthy here that we're talking about a non-Jew. Okay, so the Gemara says, if you say that it's so the Gemara asks, why does this matter? Why do we care what the reason behind this prohibition? Why you're not allowed to give the animal to the non-Jew 3 days before their holiday? That's the bottom line. So why do we care what the reason behind it is? And the Gemara says, the itlay behema l'didei. Maybe it's talking about a case where he also has his own animals. He has other animals. He has, right? You gave him your chicken, but he has 6 other chickens in his barn or wherever chickens go, right, in his chicken coop. So he didn't. So why would that make a difference? Because if you say that it looks like you're participating in his holiday, so then even if he has 6 other chickens, if you give him the chicken, it still looks like you're participating in his holiday. But if you say it's about lifnei iver lo titein mechshol, then maybe if he had 6 other chickens, then it's not a problem because you didn't set him up to do this avera. You didn't facilitate him giving a sacrifice to his God. He could have done it anyway without you. He had plenty of chickens to give as his sacrifice. He could have done it anyway without you, so who cares that you gave him the chicken? And then maybe if it's really about lifnei iver, then maybe it wouldn't be a problem if he has others. Maybe it's only a problem if you're really facilitating it, right? So far so good? Okay. So the Gemara says, the Gemara challenges that and says, now I'm on the third line where it's bolded. Actually, it's not bolded in your source packet. So the third line in the beginning of the line, if he has another chicken, right, another animal, the Gemara says, Lo avar mishum lifnei iver lo titein mechshol. Is it really true that if he has another one, he has access to other ones, and you're not really facilitating it, that he's not going to violate this prohibition? The Hatanya, doesn't another source teach us? Amar Rabbi Natan, that Rabbi Natan said, Minayin shelo yoshit adam kos shel yayin lenazir, the iver min achai lebnei Noach. Right in here we see the ben Noach come up. How do we know? What's our source that you shouldn't give a cup of wine to a nazir? Right? A nazir is someone who took an oath upon himself not to drink wine, not to cut his hair. Iver min achai is a certain part of the animal that we're not allowed to eat. And that applies to B'nai Noach also, right, to non-Jews too. So the question that Rabbi Natan's saying, what's our source for knowing that you're not allowed to give a cup of wine to a Nazir? Right? If someone took an oath upon himself that they're not allowed to drink wine, so they're not allowed to drink wine. And what's the source for us knowing that I can't put a cup of wine in front of him? Talmud lomar v'lifnei iver lo titein mechshol. The Torah says that you shouldn't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. The ha'hacha lo yahavina le'eshak le'ihu. And the Gemara says that in those cases, the Gemara says that in those cases he could have gotten it himself. It's right there. So if you're giving it, why is you're giving it to him? Right? So apparently, even if he could have gotten it himself, even if he could have violated the avera himself, you still violate the problem of lifnei iver lo titein mechshol. Apparently, it's not about whether you make it possible or it's impossible. You still violated it even if he could have gotten it himself. And the Gemara answers, Hacha b'mayaskina. What are we talking about here in our case of the animals and the non-Jews? They're on 2 sides of the river. So the Gemara makes this distinction that becomes known as like the 2 sides of the river distinction, that if the avera is accessible to the person without you, then it's okay, right? Then if you if let's say this is the cup of wine for the Nazir, right? So if the Nazir is sitting right here, I'm sitting right here, the cup of wine's right here, so whether I give it to him or he just takes it himself, it's just as easily accessible. And if I did this, he didn't violate lifnei iver lo titein mechshol. I didn't violate lifnei iver lo titein mechshol because I didn't facilitate his avera. It was right there anyway. But if the cup of wine was on the other side of the river, and I'm on the other side of the river, and I was crossing the bridge, and the only way that he could get it was by me bringing it, then that's when I violated the lifnei iver lo titein mechshol. Okay, so we kind of now set up a rule that in order to have violated this prohibition of putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person, it has to be that you're the one who's really facilitating and they couldn't have done it without you. Okay?
Just to add another interesting point, because I saw something about accessory to a crime, which is very similar to, there's also like a psychological aspect of being an accessory, because they're saying sometimes the person on its own, like psychologically wouldn't even have committed the crime unless that person was kind of back there like egging them on. So it's also like a psychological level.
So meaning,
lifting not just like the actual physical level.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, 100%. I had this debate with my students. I was teaching my students about the concept of ein shliach l'davar avera. Who's your if you like send someone else to do a sin for you, right? Like let's say you hire a hitman or something like that. Who should be more responsible? And my sort of initial reaction was that of course the person who actually commits the crime, who pulls the trigger, should be more responsible. But some of my students were arguing, no, the person who thought of it, who like thought up this whole idea, thought up the whole plan, had the malicious intent, they should actually be more responsible. And I think that fits with what you're saying, like on a psychological level, they're the one who's really like pushing it forward. So if you're the one who's like so badly wants the person to commit this crime that you're gonna like set it up for them, and they really, even if they like had physical access to the thing without you, but they might not have had like the guts to do it, then maybe that really is problematic. Maybe that makes it more problematic. Yeah, you have a question?
I just think the analogy is strange. For a non-Jew to sacrifice something to their God on a holiday is kind of like the natural course of events, but giving someone who's a Nazir like a cup of wine, it's not the Nazir wouldn't have had the wine anyway.
Well, I think the Gemara it sounds like the way that the Gemara is describing the case is that like the wine is there. It's just a question of you like passing it to him or not. But yoshitlo means like literally like pass it to him.
But in the normal course of events, a Nazir won't have wine. But in the normal course of events, a non-Jew will have a holiday.
And bring sacrifices.
Yeah,
but let's say this not.
celebrate.
But the Gemara is making a case about like the Gemara is picking up on that point and saying like if it's a case where the non-Jew has no other animals, then you did facilitate it. If you're saying if he has no other animals, he's going to go out and buy one.
Or if he has an animal, maybe he'll just eat it. Like, how do you know that he's going to use? If he has no other animals and the person's pretty poor, then most likely he's going to eat that animal. Sacrifice it, not sacrifice it. I don't know. And maybe it's a question of like the time and the culture that I'm not touching on.
There is this isser to give an animal to a non-Jew before the holiday.
Because he might.
But the question that the Gemara is discussing is why, and both of the reasons like assume that he's gonna. One of the reasons doesn't assume he's gonna sacrifice it. One of the reasons assumes that he might just like be really thankful to have it, maybe to eat, but he's gonna like pray about it to his pagan god. And the other one thinks that he might sacrifice it.
And if he doesn't sacrifice it, won't he pray anyway? I mean, he's going to keep this holiday one way or the other.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, regardless, there is this prohibition. The question that we're trying to discuss, though, is like, what's the reason behind it? Because that has other practical ramifications for us in other areas of halacha. But you're right that the prohibition exists regardless. Because and maybe we could say that it's actually maybe the Gemara should really conclude that it's actually we're concerned about both.
I just think the Nazir is a terrible example because a Nazir wouldn't normally drink the wine, and a non-Jew who has a holiday would normally somehow celebrate the holiday. But okay,
I hear what you're saying. You're saying like a non-Jew has no like reason, no motivation to not do it.
Right, but the Nazir does. So I just don't think it's a great example.
Okay, because we're assuming that a Nazir is sort of like committed to like the halacha that he took on, and the non-Jew is not. So I think that's a good question, definitely. Yeah.
You had mentioned that Abram and Achai was part of the animal. I always thought that Abram and Achai was eating the animal that was still alive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, sorry, you're right, I misspoke. I was thinking of the Gid Hanasha. Yeah, so Abram and Achai, right, is taking a limb from an animal that's still alive, which is a prohibition that applies to non-Jews, right? Obviously Jews can't do that either, but right, that's because we have also shchita. But a non-Jew could potentially eat meat that wasn't properly shechted, but they still can't take a limb from an animal that's alive. Okay, so to summarize what we have so far, we developed this. There's a problem of setting someone up putting someone in a situation where they're going to sin. But if they could have done it without you, then it's not a problem for you to put them in that situation. If they could have gotten to that situation anyway. But the question is like, what does that mean? They could have done it without you. How sort of that's a little bit fuzzy. Like. It's that they like literally, is it that like they literally couldn't have done it without you at all? Or is it just that you made it, like they could have done it without you, but you made it easier for them, right? Is making it easier for them a problem? Or is it only okay for you to do it or is it only not okay if they really couldn't have done it without you at all? So there's two schools of thought about that. If you look at source number 6, the Meiri, who's a medieval commentary on the Gemara, says, Mikol Makom, nonetheless, if the person would have to like work hard to get the thing, right, to do the sin, and you're going to make it easier for them, you're going to sort of make it inviting for them, I think that sort of ties into what you were saying. Yeah, making it more, you're gonna sort of like encourage them to do it almost, then that's a problem, okay? So according to the Meiri, it doesn't have to be that they couldn't have done it without you at all. Even if they could have done it without you, but they would have had to work harder to do it, that's still a problem. You still can't like help them. You still can't encourage it. You can't make it really easily accessible. That's the Meiri's opinion. Whereas Rashi, who I didn't put on the sheet, but Rashi thinks that if they could get it without you, even if it would be extra work for them, if it was accessible to them at all to do the sin, then you're not in violation of Lifnei Iver. So that's also two schools of thought. Okay, so we've limited Lifnei Iver Lo Titein Michshol to a situation where you need to where they couldn't have done it without you, and that's when you would be in violation of Lifnei Iver. There's also another potential prohibition. Let's say there's a situation where you're setting someone else up to sin, and but they could have done it without you. Okay, so let's say like the Nazir, right? Even though we don't like that example, but just because that's here in the Gemara, we'll use it. They're sitting right here. The wine's they're at a wine tasting event. Okay, if you didn't bring them the cup of wine, they could easily get it without you. So, according to the Me'ira, you would still be in violation of lo titein mechshol. If you bring it to them literally, but according to Rashi, you would not be. But according to Rashi, there might still potentially be some other prohibition that you violated, which is known as misayeh l'dvar avera. Okay, and that's what we're going to look at now. So, misayeh l'dvar avera means assisting someone in committing a sin. So let's say you didn't set them up for sin and put them in that situation because they could have done it anyway, but it might still be a problem for you to be the one who assists them.
What's the word, misayeh?
Misayeh, mem samach yod yod ayin,
You do that.
like an assistant.
Okay.
Okay, so let's look at source number 7. Actually, we're going to skip source. Actually, let's look at it inside. Okay, so source number 7 is talking about handing a piece of forbidden food to a Jewish person who you know is going to, right, who you know doesn't observe halacha, and they're going to eat the thing that they're not supposed to eat. Okay, so we see Tosfot says, Yisrael Sha'amar, on source number 7, page 2, Yisrael Sha'amar hoshit lo novela, o chazir, o shum isur, ein lechoshto mi hoshit lo. So if a Jewish person who observes halacha says to you, pass me that carcass or that pig or that other thing that I'm not allowed to eat, so you don't have to worry about passing it to him. Maybe he wants it for some other reason. But if it's known to you if it's known to the passer that he wants to eat it, you can't give it to him, even if it belongs to him, even if it's his. You're not allowed to pass it to him, even if he doesn't, if you know he wants to eat it. And in this Tosfot he says, here he says that this is talking about a case where he couldn't get it without you. If he could get it without you, then it would be okay. So this, right, right, as the Gemara in Avodah Zarah concluded that it's about the two. It's only a problem if it's on two separate sides of the river. If the things are on two separate sides of the river and he really needs you to help him violate this avera, then that's when it's a problem. So this Tosfot seems in line with what we saw before about Lifnei Iver. And there doesn't seem to be another problem, another reason why you shouldn't give him the thing. But let's look at source number 8 on page 3. And the background to this is that the Mishnah in Masachet Shabbos, the first Mishnah on Shabbos actually, is talking about a case of a poor person who's standing outside a house and he came to collect tzedakah on Shabbos. Okay, so that's problem number 1, is the money issue. But there's also a problem of transferring items from one domain to the other, right? When there's no eruv, you're not allowed to move things from one type of domain to another. So the poor person is standing outside the house with his basket. Right, let's say it's not a money issue. Let's say he wants you to give him some bread. Okay, so it's not a problem on Shabbos as far as that goes. But he's standing outside of the house with a basket, and he's going to place the basket in the homeowner's inside of the house, and he's going to place the basket in the hands of the homeowner and say, "Please fill this up with bread for me. I need something to eat." Okay. So the question is, so the Mishnah says that the poor person violated the prohibition of transferring items from one domain to the other, and the homeowner hasn't, okay, even though the homeowner received it. And the Gemara does say that ideally the homeowner should not receive the basket, but he didn't violate any prohibition. Okay, so Tosfot here in source number 8, they raise the question, V'im Tomar, if you want to say, V'haka'avar al lifnei iver lo titein mechshol, how could you say that the homeowner didn't violate any prohibition? Isn't he facilitating, allowing the poor person who's standing outside to sin by accepting the basket from him? If he wouldn't accept it in his hands, then the guy never would have been able to give it to him, and he wouldn't have violated this prohibition of moving the basket from one domain to another. And Tosfot says, "Va'afilu meiri shehaya achol itzlo, afilu lo haya b'yado, zelo avar mishum lifnei iver lo titein lifnei iver." Even if you want to make this a case where he could have done it without you, right? Let's say you say, okay, it's a case where there was a shelf right there, and he could have just put it down on the shelf, and you putting it in your hands didn't finalize him violating the Savira, because he would have done it anyway. Tosfot says, right, the Moshi Kos Yayin Nazir Moki La Parikama the Masachet Avodah Zarah the Kai Betray Avred in Ahara, right, it's not Lifnei Iver, as we concluded in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, that it's not Lifnei Iver if he could have done it without you. It's only Lifnei Iver if he couldn't have done it without you, if it's on the two sides of the river. Mikol Makom, Tosfot says, Isur D'Rabbanan Miha Ika, nonetheless, there still is a rabbinic prohibition, Shechayav Hafrisho Me Isur, that we have to separate people, we have to distance people from sins. That there is apparent, Tosfot here is saying that there is this prohibition to, that there is this obligation that we have to try to make people not sin, right? There is a prohibition to assist someone in sinning, and here this is where we see this idea of Misayel Dvar Avira. So it might not be a problem with Lifnei Iver if he could have done it without you, but you still are not supposed to assist people in sinning and doing Avirot, and that's another rabbinic level prohibition. So there's a couple of ways to understand this prohibition. It could be, right, a rabbinic prohibition associated with the biblical prohibition of Lifnei Iver. Maybe biblically speaking, right, Midoraita, you only violate Lifnei Iver if your assistance was necessary, but even if your assistance isn't necessary, the rabbis came and said, like, still don't help him out. It could also be an halacha associated with the idea of hochayach tochiach et amitecha, that there's another principle in the Torah of rebuking our fellow Jews, right? We kind of all have responsibility toward each other to make sure that we're all on the right path, and maybe it's associated with that we have an obligation to tell someone when they're doing something wrong, and a parallel obligation rabbinic obligation would be to make sure that we don't assist people in doing something wrong. Or maybe it could be an independent thing, that there's the problem of assisting someone in doing an Avera when they absolutely need your assistance, and there's another rabbinic level prohibition of assisting someone in doing an Avera when they don't need your assistance. And that final approach is generally the accepted one, that it's its own prohibition to assist people in violating an Avera.
And that's rabbinic.
Yeah.
And that comes from Lifnei Iver, or does that come from hochayach tochiach?
So both are
matter.
options. We don't know
Okay.
necessarily at the end of the day. But those are like two different ways of looking at it.
When the rabbis come up with this rabbinic law, they don't say where they get it from, like what's the derived.
And there's no place in the Gemara that I know of where it says like there's an Isra of Misayel Dvar Avira and it comes from this. Like Tosfos here mentions this idea, which makes us realize that there is also this other idea out there, but it's not like so clearly developed where it came from.
And only Tosos, or do other people? I mean,
So in later sources, we'll see. It is also mentioned in other sources also. Okay, so in the interest of time, we're going to skip a few of the sources and I'll kind of summarize them outside. The Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserlist, who's the Ashkenazi commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, so these two Tosfots contradict each other, right? Because in one place, he doesn't say that they're, right, he says, like, if he didn't need your help, then it's fine, you could do it. And the other place, he says, even if he doesn't need your help, you still can't do it. So they contradict each other. The Ramah, he just kind of leaves these two ideas as contradictory, and he brings down both opinions. And he says that we go by the more lenient opinion, that if your help's not needed, then it's okay. And some of the other medieval commentaries and then later commentaries try to resolve this seeming contradiction in different ways, right? Like, is there a problem to help someone if you're not absolutely necessary, or is there not? So the Ketav Sofer, we're going to skip source 10. The Ketav Sofer in source 11, he brings two ways. He brings one way of reconciling this. He says that if he distinguishes between assistance prior to the sin versus assisting the person during the sin. So if you sort of set someone up, if there's assistance that's offered prior to the forbidden act, but that lends itself to the violation occurring, like, for example, giving the animal to the non-Jew, you weren't there, like, physically, like, helping him, like, put the sacrifice on the altar. You gave him the animal, and then later, a few days later, he gave the sacrifice. So that would be, that's Lifnei Iver Lo Titein Mechshol, and if you weren't absolutely necessary in causing that to later happen, then it's not a problem. Whereas Misayel Dvar Avira is kind of like in the act, right? So if you're helping someone in the act, even if they could have done it without you, you're still not allowed to help them in the act. And that's the distinction that he makes. Another distinction that's made is if someone expressly, like, says their willingness, their desire to sin, right? That you're not allowed to help them if they, like, expressly say, like, I want to do this. But if they don't, and it's sort of like they don't know any better or something like that, then if they don't need you, then you would be allowed to help. Then it wouldn't be a problem for you to kind of help to do something that sets up the situation. Okay, so to tie things together, because we're almost out of time, what does this all mean for our question of inviting a non-observant Jew to your Shabbos table? So let's think about this. If you turn the page,
So I got the question when you said about the Arabs not mentioning it to your friends.
Yeah, it would be the same thing. Like if, let's say you know the arrow is going to be down on a given Shabbos, or you which I don't know why that would happen. Like you don't usually know in advance, but are you allowed to invite company that you know is going to, push their stroller or come with a gift or whatever? Okay. So according to the Katav Sofer's distinction, you're only not allowed to invite. You're only not So we're talking about inviting a guest to your Shabbos table. So you're inviting them before Shabbos. You're extending the invitation before Shabbos. You're not like physically putting them in the taxi, right, or swiping the Metro card for them, or paying for whatever it is. Your assistance is being offered. Your sort of act is offered beforehand. So according to the Katav Sofer's distinction, it wouldn't be a violation of Misayeh L'Dvar Avera, because you're only not allowed to assist them rabbinically. This rabbinic prohibition only applies when you're assisting them in the act. But beforehand, it would only be Lifnei Iver. And the question is, like, would they have done it anyway, right? Because if they would have done it anyway without you, then it would be okay. So let's see what Rav Moshe Feinstein says, and I'll read it in English. So he says, a discussion of what prohibition is involved, or in source 12 on page 4, in inviting guests to shul on Shabbos when you know they will come by car, and this is from 1953. So he was asked by Rav Naftali Karlbach of Detroit, if it's a violation of Lifnei Iver to invite people to daven at shul on Shabbos if you know they're going to violate Shabbos by traveling there in a car. Okay, so can you make a program that you publicize and advertise all over the place and invite people to come to a beautiful, Leibadik davening on Shabbos if you know that they're going to go by car or train or subway or whatever to get there? And Rav Moshe says, I answered that inviting people who live far, such that it's impossible for them to get there without violating Shabbos, is definitely prohibited. Okay, because they couldn't do it without you, right? Meaning if you didn't, if they couldn't do it any other way, right? They couldn't get there any other way, so you were definitely setting them up to violate the prohibition. And you could argue and say, well, they would have gotten in the car anyway to go somewhere else. If you didn't invite them to shul, they would have gone to the mall, right? But nonetheless, they couldn't have gotten to this place without this violating the Saveira, so Rav Moshe says that it's a problem.
But when you say invite, you mentioned publicizing an event.
Right.
So if you're not inviting somebody directly, but they heard about it,
right,
is that also?
Okay, so it's a good question, right? The case that he's dealing with here is not exactly our question that we started out with of inviting someone to your Shabbos table, which is much more direct. And you'll see at the end, he does kind of distinguish between advertising and people happen to find out about it versus specifically targeting this crowd of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that distinction is valid, right? If you're specifically targeting this group of people who's not religious, that's more direct than maybe advertising it more generally and they happen to find out, which maybe would be less problematic. And he says, okay, so that's a problem. He then says, it's even worse than Lifnei Iver. It's a violation of Mesit. Mesit is another prohibition in the Torah, which is getting others to sin. And usually the context of Mesit in the Torah is about Avodah Zarah. It's getting people to veer off the path of Torah to worship other gods. He says it's a violation of Mesit, of getting others to sin. And even though one only gets stoned for violating Mesit if one gets someone to worship idols, nonetheless, with regard to the violation and the punishment from heaven, one can violate Mesit with regard to every sin. So even though the Torah gives the punishment for Mesit only if you get someone to to worship Avodah Zarah, Rav Moshe says that his understanding of the Gemara is that God still punishes you and you still, have violated the prohibition if you get someone to sin any sin. So this, just to kind of tie back to the methodology piece, this is really an example of Rav Moshe Feinstein, looking back at his original understanding of the Gemara about Mesit and applying that here. No other the halachic authorities that talk about Lifnei Iver really bring up this idea of Mesit, because usually it's really talked about in the context of Avodah Zarah, and when we're talking about inviting someone for Shabbos or something like that, we're not talking about Mesit, and he's kind of looking back at an original discussion of Mesit in the Gemara and applying it here, and that is very much, I think, reflective of his methodology of looking at, a unique and creative understanding of original sources and applying them to, the contemporary question that he's dealing with. So just to tie up and wrap up, because we're pretty much out of time, he ends up concluding that Lifnei Iver, it's still Lifnei Iver even for someone who lives close by if you know that if you know that they won't walk. But in that case, he says it's not a violation of Mesit, it's only a violation of Lifnei Iver. And he says even if the invitation extended isn't really an invitation, but rather an announcement, he says it's not a problem of Mesit, but it might still be a problem of Lifnei Iver. So Rav Moshe ends up ruling pretty stringently about this question, and I think he would all the more so rule stringently about a direct invitation to someone to come to your Shabbos table. But Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, in his response on the Minchat Shlomo, he actually takes a very different approach, and I encourage you to read it yourself inside, in Hebrew and English. We don't have time to read it inside here, but I'll just give a quick summary where he says that, yes, there's this prohibition of lifnei iver, but if you're not, right, let's say you want to invite someone to your Shabbos table, or he's talking here about giving someone food without knowing that they're not going to say a bracha. So if the options are not giving this person this food because you're going to say, like, well, I know you're not going to say a bracha, so I'm not going to give you the food, or I'll only give you this if you're going to say a bracha, which is, if someone's going to take that, they're going to be offended, they're going to be insulted, what do you think they're going to think about Orthodox Torah observant Jews? Not very highly, right? They're going to think we're judgmental, we look down upon people, and they're going to hate Torah, they're going to hate God, it's not going to be a positive spiritual experience for them. So he says, if you're being careful about lifnei iver is going to cause this person to violate a bigger sin of, heresy, of thinking that the whole Torah is terrible and everyone, God is so terrible that he created the system and the situation, then of course you have to give them the food because you want to prevent them, because you want it to be an opportunity of spiritual growth and of connecting and of appreciating the system, and not, of putting them in a situation where they're going to actually violate a bigger sin and it's going to create a much bigger problem. So his general attitude, his philosophy is more, if the bigger picture of the situation is to create one of spiritual growth and of spiritual connectedness, then violating the smaller picture issue of lifnei iver is actually something that you should do. But you should try to, avoid it being technically lifnei iver by, let's say, offering the person to sleep over, even if you know they're not going to take you up on it. But at least then you offer. So you're sort of making it that they're doing it of their own volition. You're allowing them to to not violate the Avera. He says you can invite them if you offer them a place to sleep over, because then you're not facilitating the Avera, they're doing it themselves, right? And then they definitely could do it without you, and you are allowing them to do it in a way that wouldn't violate the Avera.
Do you have to ask them to come before Shabbos? Like, I never understood that. Like, if let's say you invite somebody Friday night.
Right. So probably
how
you
do
would
you
say...
get over... Well, let's say you want to have somebody... you can get over by inviting them to sleep over, but if you...
he would say, like, you should tell them, if Shabbos starts at 7 and you're not going to have dinner until 8, say, like, we're eating, say, like, come over at 7. You don't have to tell them, like... So Shabbos lunch, I guess... So, yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess probably he would say it's better to invite someone for Friday night.
Right.
And...
Or offer them like to sleep over Friday night.
Yeah, like you want to come to my house for the weekend and join us for our... But it is, like, more awkward. But as long as you sort of, like, phrase it that way, even if you know they're not going to take you up on it, I think he would say it's okay.
And you're saying this in the name of Rav Shlomo?
Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, yeah.
That was not Rav Moshe Feinstein.
Correct. Rav Moshe Feinstein took a much more stringent approach to this, that it's sort of macit, right? You're like, it's as if you're, veering someone off the course of, toward idol worship if you do this thing, which was, he was talking, his specific case wasn't about inviting someone to your Shabbos table.
All seniors, please go to your mechanecha rooms. All seniors, please go to your mechanecha rooms.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, what we talked about at the beginning, just in terms of, like, the psychology and the personalities. Like, I wonder how Rav Moshe, I know he lived in modern times, but I feel like things have evolved more just in terms of Kirov and trying to bring people closer, even since his, time, that maybe he would feel differently, and make a different sound.
Me'ira Bam, grade 9, please come up to Mrs. Detail for 1 minute, I have to give you something. Me'ira Bam, please come up here.
Was actually someone who was trying to do that, who was trying to, like, bring people,
really?
make a...
Do you know what year it was?
It was 1953.
Oh, 53.
But you're right, like, the world changes, and obviously, and we're going to talk about this hopefully in coming sessions, that, societal factors and, like, the human condition and, obviously also very much goes into play. And therefore, like, these questions need to be reevaluated as time goes on.
Right.
Even by the same...
But if there's a poster for an event, if there's a poster for, like they had this, bring Shabbos into your, should it say at the bottom of the poster, please do not, arrive by car, or, I mean,
Attention,
if you're
Maya
going to
Note,
have
and
something.
I think maybe a better way to do it would be to say, like,
Book Day in
please, you know, contact so-and-so if you want to read
Photo
information.
contest
That's
with
happening.
Buzz.
Yeah, that's
Really?
happening.
Right, but to somehow have that, I know,
Right.
let's say,
Maya
Yeah, I definitely think that would be a
congratulations.
good
And
idea.
that's the main office to get your Lazy Bee gift
the
card.
Guerra
Yes.
record have on
So
it,
it's a
please do not play
Excerpt
on
from
Shabbos,
The Color of
for
Water.
Yom Tov, right?
Oh, right, there's so many interesting questions that come up from this topic, like I know, like the B&H website, like it goes down on Shabbos because they don't want people to do transactions on Shabbos. Anyway,
A lot of the Jewish ones go down.
Yeah.
Semantics.
okay, thank you so much, all so much for joining me. Next week, we're gonna talk, we're gonna continue learning another topic of efficiency and discussing his methodology.
Now, a dramatic read of an excerpt from The Color of Water.
Miss Kerr was like telling me.
As a boy, I never knew where my mother was from. You wouldn't think I was born with Derek Kimmy.
That's a good question,
When I asked
too.
her,